Throughout the 1880s and into the 1890s, William Dean, the Great Western Railway's chief locomotive engineer, was building and playing with experimental locomotives. In 1891, he built something a bit more conventional, a 222 express passenger locomotive. They'd been common since the 1830s, so with 60 years of examples, surely you can't mess this up. These were the 3001 class. They were fast, and they had massive driving wheels, 7 feet 8.5 inches. Due to the large wheels, the boiler had to be narrow, 4 foot 3 inches in diameter. To keep up with steam production, the boiler had to be made longer. No big deal, right? September 12th, 1893. Box Tunnel. Inside of this tunnel, fast trains regularly run down a 1 in 100 slope. Nothing is unusual here, of course, but there's a defect in the track, causing an irregular inward curve, and Dean's 222's leading axle were highly loaded due to the long boiler. This made the locomotives very unstable at speed, a problem for a high-speed engine, of course. In the conditions of the tunnel, a four-wheeled bogie would have handled itself well, where the simple two-wheel leading axle broke. So to prevent further similar derailment, the 3031 class were born. The same 222, with its frame now extended, featuring a four-wheel bogie. This made them much more stable and allowed for parts to be a bit more spread out, making maintenance cheaper and easier. In March 1894, the engine involved in the crash was rebuilt with the front bogie. It must have been very effective because in December of that year, the rest were rebuilt the same way. This design was good enough that after the class were all rebuilt, 50 more engines were made to that design, with slightly smaller pistons. The last completed in March 1899. 13 such engines would be given new parallel standard 2 boilers. These singles were very fast, one averaging 70 miles per hour on a 117-mile train. It's not a stretch to believe they could reach 90, other singles had before. However, like every other single-driver engine, they were doomed to scrap in the early 1900s. Between 1908 and 1915, the class were withdrawn. The last survivor, number 3076, being withdrawn in December of 1916. None of this class survived, but while they were around, they had some very interesting lives, despite the short time, all things considered. 3065, Duke of Connaught, had a record-breaking run with the Royal Mail in 1904, and 3041, James Mason, was renamed to the Queen and took over royal train duties for a while. In 1981, a static replica of number 3041 was built, and a modified LB and SCR C2X tender was used for this engine. The engine remains where it has for years now, but the tender was scrapped to make space. The Bluebell Railway Atlantic Group got hold of some pieces from the tender, however, and they're now part of the complete replica of 32424 Beachy Head, the H2 Atlantic. Like all of the later built singles, the Achilles class was doomed from the start, with working lives as short as 12 years. Stronger engines with bigger boilers and better adhesion were only just around the corner. Before they had even stopped building Dean singles, the Armstrong class 440s were out, as well as several batches of Dukes and Bulldogs. In 1902, the singles' fates were sealed, with the appearance of Churchward's 460 Saint class. The Saints took over the top-link services, and the previously mentioned Express 440s were pushed down onto secondary passenger service. The singles were no use on goods trains with their terrible adhesion, and so it was time for them to go. The more express engines got demoted, the more Dean singles got replaced. This was the case for every later class of single-driver locomotive. It didn't take long to go from 422 to 440 to 442 and eventually to 460. There was only 3 years between the building of the last Dean single and the first Saint. They were ancient-looking locomotives right off the line. Speed was their only claim to fame. By the end of the 1910s, the light, fast trains the singles were made for were all but gone. The Dean singles seemed very impressive at the time they were built, even for their older appearance. But they had the same fate as every single-driver engine, as I've mentioned. Speed was no longer the problem. It was no longer the goal. More power was needed, better adhesion. A slower 440 was better than a high-speed single could ever be for the new status quo. Impressive, perhaps, but not long for this world. Personally, I'd love to see a working replica of one of these, but it's not really practical. Can you imagine one of these trying to pull a few BR Mark 1s? I mean, it'd look really silly, so of course I want to see it. But I'd imagine it would struggle an awful lot. Suddenly, a Terrier seems very practical for modern use. Next video will either be on Worsdale's R1s or the London Northwestern Whale precursors. I've got a lot to say on the precursors, and there's a locomotive trust that I want to talk about. Good things, good things. Hope to see you in the comments here, over there, or in one of the past videos. There is a handful of playlists now as I start to fill out the variety. I'm feeling really good about this. Drop any suggestions in the comments. Anything you want to see covered, let me know, and I'll try to touch on it.